determine whether the following inductive arguments are strong or weak. So take this first one here. Um, and what you have to ask, when it comes to inductive arguments and you're testing for strength or weakness, you have to ask whether the information contained in the premises is such that it makes the conclusion likely to be true. It makes the conclusion probably true as a result. It's not. It doesn't make it necessarily true or absolutely true, but it makes it more likely to be true than not. And again, you have to bracket, the truth or falsity of the premises when you do this test. So take this first one here. People have been listening to rock and roll music for over 100 years. People probably will still be listening to it from a year from now. Now, suppose you didn't know when rock and roll was, originated. Or what time period or when exactly. Still, if you're just testing this information to see whether it makes a conclusion likely to be true, then then the answer to that is yes, and so it's a strong inductive argument. Okay, so if rock and roll, people have been listening to rock and roll for over 100 years, and it's likely to be true that. Sorry, I'm having trouble with this. Okay, there we go. So it makes it, that makes it likely to be true. It's strong. Now I forgot to put up here that this one is invalid. So that second deductive argument is invalid. Okay, so now let's take this next argument. Coca-Cola is an extremely popular soft drink consumed all over the world. Therefore, probably someone somewhere is drinking a Coke right this minute. So conclusion, there's somebody drinking Coke at this minute. What's the premise supporting that? Does the premise make it likely to be true? And the answer to that is going to be yes, right? Coca-Cola is an extremely popular soft drink consumed all over the world. So if that's the case, then, it doesn't matter, what part of the world you're in, what time zone you're in, right? If it's midnight here, everybody's asleep. Well, across the world, it's, noon and somebody's probably having a drink. So it's probably true that somebody somewhere, on this planet is drinking a Coke right this minute, given, given the fact that, that it's so popular. So this one is also going to be strong. Okay, so now the next part here, I'm going to actually, skip over the 6 argument patterns, right? I think we got sufficient practice on that in the homework. So I want to help you with the argument diagrams. And I also wanted to help you, do the, the test for validity or strength on these arguments. So now I want to, work with you to draw the diagrams for these arguments. Okay, so here's the first one, right? At one time, Gary Kasparov had the highest ranking of any grandmaster in history. However, he was beaten in a chess tournament by a computer program called Deep Blue, so the computer program should be given a ranking higher than Kasparov. So first thing you do, right, is you want to sort of identify how many statements there are here. So, and then any, premise or conclusion indicators, right? So there's one statement here, right? At one time, Gary Kasparov had the highest ranking of any chess grandmaster in history. 2, he was beaten by a computer program called Deep Blue. So here's the conclusion indicator, and it's for the third statement, which is the computer program should be given a higher ranking higher than Kasparov. So now you're always going to have the conclusion, on the bottom. So you write out the 3 there, and I'm probably not going to write circles here because it's a little bit hard with this program, with this drawing tablet. We have 2 premises, and we have to ask, right, are these premises dependent or independent? Remember that we have a way of testing, right? It's the isolation test, right? So if you remove one premise, and it diminishes the support for the conclusion by removing, that premise, and the remaining, premise is standing on its own, providing, is the support influence when you do that. So let's take number one, right? Number one, at one time Gary Kasparov had the highest ranking of any chess grandmaster in history. Does that alone support 3? No, it doesn't, right? So it needs to go with 2. They need to be kept together, right? And they're both supporting 3. Okay, so that's the argument diagram for number 1. Let's move on to the argument diagram for number 2. Exercise helps strengthen your cardiovascular system. It also lowers your cholesterol, increases the blood flow to the brain, and enables you to think longer. Thus, there is no reason for you not to start exercising regularly. So it looks like we have one statement there, another statement here, and this statement, is an enumeration, so you can go ahead and keep it all together. It does these three things, right? It lowers your cholesterol, increases the blood flow to the brain, and enables you to think longer. So we'll keep that under 2. Here's the conclusion indicator so the conclusion is going to be statement number 3. There is no reason for you not to start exercising regularly. So we'll start by putting, the conclusion on the bottom there of the diagram, and then asking, do these 2 premises need to be kept together as dependent premises, or are they each providing support on their own, in which case they would be independent premises? So let's test this, right? Say we take number 1 and ask, is it supporting the conclusion on its own? Exercise helps strengthen your cardiovascular system. Thus, there is no reason for you not to start exercising regularly. I think the answer to that is going to be yes. It alone provides support. Okay. Now, with regard to the second one, right, we have to test it too, right? Make sure it's independent, because, 1 might be independent, this one, but then 2 might be dependent on 1, right? That's a possible scenario too. So you have to test each to see if they're independent. So let's try number 2. It also lowers your cholesterol, increases the blood flow to the brain, and enables you to think longer. Do all those considerations, right, that are contained in number 2 provide support to the conclusion that there is no reason for you not to start exercising regularly? The answer to that is yes, right? So they are independent premises providing support to the conclusion. And that's going to be your argument diagram for number 2 there. So now let's try number 3. If you start a strenuous exercise regimen before you know if your body is ready, you can cause serious damage. Therefore, you should always have a physical checkup before you start a rigid exercise program. Okay, so let's see. It looks like, this whole thing this conditionals are one statement, right? So you never want to partition conditionals into 2 statements. They're actually, they're linked together. You can't, tear them apart, as it were. So here you just have one, conditional. It's one statement, okay? And then, the other one is going to be the conclusion. And you don't have to ask, whether, one is dependent or independent, because it's the only premise that's there, right? So, it's the only possible premise that can be supporting the conclusion. Okay, so that'll be your diagram for number 3. And it's possible, for you to have a one premise argument. You need one premise in your in an argument, at least one premise, if not more. So one premise is fine. Now let's try number 4. Since television commercials help pay the cost of programming, and because I can always turn off the sound of the commercials, go to the bathroom, or get something to eat or drink, it follows that commercials are not such a bad thing. So notice that you have one sentence here, but we're going to break it up into statements. Statements can be linked, by, into one statement, even though they contain more than one statement, right? So they're compound statements. This is a compound statement. It has 3 simple statements, and I've circled here the premise indicator since and because. And then this is a conclusion indicator. It follows that. So you have one statement here: television commercials help pay the cost of programming, and 2. I can always turn off the sound of the commercials, go to the bathroom, or get something to eat or drink. It follows that commercials are not such a bad thing. So number 3 is going to be the conclusion that is being supported by the premises. And let's think about whether these premises are dependent or independent. So now let's try number 1. Let's try the isolation method on number 1. So television commercials help pay the cost of programming. Therefore, it follows that commercials are not such a bad thing. Does number 1 by itself provide support to number 3? Now, sometimes the answer to this is not always obvious, right? You might have to give an argument for it, right? But I think that in this case, this premise is not on its own going to provide, support to conclusion. It doesn't take away, all of the support for the conclusion, but it's definitely diminished, right? So whenever the support that's being provided by a conclusion is diminished when you remove it from another premise, then that means that it's dependent on the other premise. They should go together. So number 1 and 2 should go together and be diagrammed as providing support to the conclusion, number 3. Okay. So, and if you think about number 2, look, I can always turn off the sound of the commercials, go to the bathroom or get something to eat or drink. It follows that commercials are not such a bad thing. Again, if you remove 2 from number 1, it's going to take away, the support in to some degree, right? It's going to diminish it. I mean, it does provide, a little bit of support for it, but it's diminished when you take it away from number 1, given, commercials, they help pay the cost for the programming. That's a good thing. And I can always, turn off the commercials when I need to. So both of those things, should stay together and be diagrammed as providing support for number 3. So let's try number 5. We should never take our friends for granted. True friends are there when we need them. They suffer with us when we fail, and they are happy when we succeed. So here you have, one statement here. You don't have any premise or conclusion indicators. Okay, so you have to figure that one out on your own. So second statement is true friends are there when we need them. And then third statement, they suffer with us when we fail and they're happy when we succeed. So we can go ahead and keep those together. So the conclusion here is going to be number 1. Whenever you're not clear, or the text isn't clear when in regards to what the conclusion is, and you have to think about it this way. It's like, what's the main passage, of this conclusion? What's the upshot? What is it trying to get at? Well, here it's, that friends shouldn't be taken for granted. Why? Well, because, friends are there when we need them. So, and I think these are going to be dependent premises, right? So that alone provides support to, the conclusion that we should never take our friends for granted, right? They're there when we need them. Therefore, we should never take them for granted. And then, number 3 is also providing independent support. So on its own, you ask, okay, does the idea that friends suffer with us when we fail and they're happy when we succeed provide support to the conclusion that we should never take friends for granted? The answer to that is yes. Right, so there's your diagram for that. 2 independent premises providing support to a conclusion. Okay, so I hope this review helped you out, and good luck on the exam.